The night was quiet, too quiet as Daniel walked across the ruins of the old alien settlement. The air smelled of ash and dust, and the ground was broken with scattered metal and stone. He had been sent to map the area, nothing more, but something inside told him this place still held secrets. The wind pushed faint sounds across the cracked walls. At first he thought it was the creak of old beams, or the whisper of shifting sand. But then he heard it again, soft, weak, almost like a cry. He stopped, his flashlight sweeping across the dirt. The sound was there, faint, almost lost, but it was real. Curiosity pulled him forward. He moved slowly, careful not to make noise. His boots crunched against the gravel, and the sound made the cry stop. For a moment he thought he had imagined it, but then a small movement caught his eye. A figure half buried in dirt lying broken against the wall. It was a woman, not human. Her skin shimmered faintly under the moonlight. Pale with streaks of silver, her long hair was tangled with dust, her body trembling as if every breath was a struggle. She looked up at him with wide, glowing eyes, full of fear and pain. Daniel froze, his heart pounded. He had seen aliens before. Traders, soldiers, even refugees, but never like this. Never one so helpless, so fragile. The woman's lips moved, but no words came out. Only a dry rasp. She tried to push herself up. But her arms gave out, and she fell back into the dirt for a moment. Daniel thought about leaving. He had no orders to help. He didn't even know if she was dangerous. Maybe she was left here for a reason. Maybe she was a criminal. But then he saw the marks on her body, scars, burns, cuts that were too cruel to be accidents. She wasn't left here by chance. She was abandoned, broken, discarded. The flashlight beam shook in his hand. He crouched down slowly, keeping his voice soft. "I won't hurt you," he whispered, though he knew she couldn't understand his words. Still, the tone carried meaning. She flinched, curling into herself, her glowing eyes watching him like a trapped animal. He set the flashlight on the ground and pulled off his jacket. Slowly, he laid it over her thin body. She shivered but did not resist. Her hands clutched the fabric as if it were the first kind touch she had ever known. Daniel felt a weight in his chest heavier than fear. The ruins around them seemed to lean closer, dark and silent witnesses to her suffering. He wondered who had done this to her, and why. Questions burned in his mind, but the woman gave no answers. Only the fragile sound of her shallow breathing. Daniel reached into his pack and pulled out a canteen of water. He uncapped it and held it out. The woman hesitated. Her lips cracked, her throat dry. Her trembling hands finally reached out, touching his fingers by mistake. The contact was brief, but it carried more power than words. She pulled back, afraid, then slowly took the water. She drank too fast and coughed, spilling some over her chin. Daniel steadied the canteen and let her sip again. She looked at him with confusion, as if kindness was something she had never expected. Her glowing eyes flickered with something more than fear. A tiny spark of hope, but hope was fragile, and the night was full of danger. In the distance, Daniel thought he heard another sound. Not the weak cry of a broken soul, but the harsh echo of something else. Perhaps voices, perhaps footsteps. He looked over his shoulder, the ruins suddenly feeling less empty. The woman noticed too, her eyes widened. Her breathing grew quick. She clutched his jacket tighter, as if the cloth itself could protect her. Her fear told him more than words could. Whoever had left her here might not be far. Daniel's pulse quickened. He knew he had a choice. He could walk away, pretend he had seen nothing. He could report back to base and leave her to whatever fate had already broken her. Or he could do the one thing no one expected of him. Stay, protect her, give her a chance at life. The alien woman trembled in the dirt, staring at him with desperate eyes. Her body was broken, her spirit close to fading. And yet in that fragile moment, Daniel felt the weight of her life pressing against his choice. The ruins whispered around him, the night held its breath. Suspense clung to the air. What would he do? And what would it cost him? Daniel kept his hand steady near the alien woman. His jacket still covered her, but her body shook like a leaf in the wind. He could see the fear in her glowing eyes, and it cut deeper than any wound. She did not see him as a rescuer. She saw him as another threat, another shadow ready to harm her. He lowered his voice, speaking softly even though she could not understand his words. "Easy, it's all right," he whispered. His tone was calm, slow, as if he were talking to a child. But the woman flinched when he moved, her hands pulling the jacket tighter around herself. Her breathing quickened, her chest rising and falling too fast. Daniel hesitated. His orders did not cover this. There was no protocol for finding an abandoned alien, especially one who looked tortured. His mind told him to walk away, but his heart refused. He placed the canteen closer to her side, sliding it slowly across the dirt. The woman's eyes followed the movement. Her body tense. For a long moment nothing happened. She stared at the canteen as if it were a trap. Her trembling fingers reached out, then stopped. She looked at him, then at the water again. Finally, with shaking hands, she pulled it close. Her lips touched the metal, and she drank slowly this time, careful not to spill. Daniel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. She had accepted the water. It was a small step, but it was a bridge between them. He sat down on the ground a few feet away, giving her space. His posture was open, unthreatening. He wanted her to see he was not her enemy. The woman's eyes never left him. Every movement he made, even the smallest shift, made her tense. Her body bore the language of someone who had lived too long in pain. She expected cruelty, not kindness, and every second was a battle between her fear and her need to survive. Daniel reached into his bag and pulled out a ration bar. He unwrapped it slowly so the sound would not startle her. Then he placed it on the ground between them. He pushed it forward just enough so she could reach it if she wanted. At first she ignored it. Her eyes flicked back and forth between him and the food. Hunger shone in her face, but fear held her back. She drew her knees closer to her chest, the jacket slipping slightly from her shoulders. Her skin beneath was covered in bruises, some old, some new. Daniel's chest tightened at the sight. Whoever had left her here had wanted her to suffer. He clenched his fists but forced his anger down. It would not help her if he looked dangerous. He leaned back a little, showing he would not move closer. Minutes passed. The ruins around them whispered with the wind. Finally, her hand crept forward, slow as a shadow. She grabbed the ration bar and pulled it back quickly. Her glowing eyes locked on him, waiting for him to react. When he stayed still, she unwrapped it with clumsy fingers. The first bite made her flinch, as if expecting pain, but then she chewed. Daniel watched in silence. His presence was heavy, but he dared not break it. Every bite she took was a small victory, not of food, but of trust. By the time the ration bar was gone, her breathing had slowed. Her eyes still carried fear, but something else glimmered there, uncertainty. She looked at him again, and for the first time, she did not shrink away. Her lips parted, a small sound escaping. It was not a word, not even close, but it was a voice, her voice, weak and trembling. She said something in her own language. Her voice cracked like dry wood. The meaning was lost, but the tone was not. It was a question. Daniel shook his head gently, raising his hands in a gesture of honesty. "I don't understand," he whispered. His voice carried no threat, only patience. The woman stared at him, her brows knitting together. She seemed frustrated, but her fear did not rise again. The night pressed on around them, but inside the ruins a fragile bond was forming. The human had given food and water. The alien woman had accepted them. It was not trust, not yet, but it was no longer pure fear either. Suddenly a distant noise echoed again. Daniel's head snapped toward the sound. It was faint but sharper than before, not the wind, not the ruins. He thought it might be voices, rough and low. The woman stiffened instantly, her hands gripped the jacket, and her glowing eyes widened in terror. She looked at him with desperation. Her lips moved again. The sound urgent, though he could not understand it. But he did not need words. Her fear told him everything. Someone was coming, and she did not want them to find her. Daniel's pulse quickened. He shifted his weight, looking into the shadows. He had no idea who these people were or why they hunted her. But in that moment, the choice grew sharper. He could leave, or he could stay and protect her. The alien woman leaned forward, her body trembling for the first time. Her hand reached toward him, not for water or food, but for him. Her fingers brushed against his wrist. It was a touch filled with fear, but also with a silent plea. Daniel's breath caught. He looked at her and saw not just a broken alien in the dirt, but a soul begging for safety. Her eyes glowed like dim stars, fragile but alive. In that single touch she had spoken more than words could, and Daniel knew deep inside that his path was changing. He was no longer just a traveler in ruins, he was now her only hope. The night deepened and Daniel kept close to the alien woman. His senses were alert, but his eyes kept returning to her fragile figure wrapped in his jacket. The fear in her eyes had not gone away, but something else now flickered beneath it, a spark that showed she wanted to live. Her body trembled as though each breath was a fight. Daniel leaned closer, careful not to frighten her, and saw the marks that covered her skin. They were not the wounds of war or random accidents. They were lines of cruelty carved by intent, burns traced across her arms, scars cut deep into her shoulders, and bruises spread like shadows over her ribs. Daniel's throat tightened. Whoever had left her here had not only abandoned her, they had punished her, broken her, and cast her away like worthless debris. His fists clenched, but he forced himself to remain calm. Anger could not heal her. She needed patience, not rage. The woman shifted, her glowing eyes catching the faint light. She noticed his gaze on her wounds and pulled the jacket tighter. Shame flashing across her face, Daniel raised his hand slowly and shook his head. His voice was soft. "Not your fault," he whispered, though she could not understand his words. His tone carried truth. For a long while they sat in silence. Only the wind moved, carrying dust across the ruins. Then the woman made a sound, faint but sharp. She pointed to one of the scars, then to the darkness beyond the wall. Her trembling hand painted a story without words. Daniel watched carefully. Her gestures spoke of people who had struck her, people who had bound her. He understood little, but enough to know this was not the cruelty of strangers. It was from her own kind. She had been hurt by those who should have cared for her. Her breathing quickened as memories returned. Her glowing eyes watered and her body curled in on itself. Daniel could almost see her reliving the pain, the betrayal, the moment when her people turned their backs on her. He wanted to reach out, to stop her from falling into despair again, but he held back, afraid of pushing too far instead. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small light module. He pressed the switch, and a soft glow spread between them, warm and steady. The woman flinched at first, but then stared at the light as though it was something she had not seen in years. Her hand reached toward it slowly, her fingers hovering above the glow. Daniel smiled faintly. "It's safe," he said, his voice calm. The woman touched the light and gasped softly. Her fingers trembled, but when the glow did not harm her, she let out a weak sound, almost a laugh, but broken by her dry throat for the first time. Daniel saw something fragile and rare in her expression. Wonder. The scars still covered her. The fear still lived inside her. But for a heartbeat she remembered that not everything was pain. She looked at him again, studying his face. Her eyes narrowed with confusion. Why was he helping her? Why did he not strike her or mock her as her people had done? Daniel could see the question in her stare, and though he had no answer she would understand, he simply said, "Because you deserve better." A distant noise shattered the fragile moment. Daniel's head snapped up. The sound was clearer now, echoing through the ruins like heavy boots on stone. The woman gasped, clutching the jacket. Her body shook with panic. She made a weak motion with her hand, pointing to herself, then slicing her arm across the air. A gesture of destruction. Daniel understood enough. Whoever these people were, they were not here to help her. They were here to finish what they had started. His jaw tightened. His mission was forgotten now. His only thought was that he could not leave her to them. He crouched beside her, his hand hovered above hers, giving her the chance to decide slowly, painfully. She let her trembling fingers rest in his. It was a fragile connection, but it was trust, however small. Her glowing eyes shimmered with tears. She whispered something in her tongue. The words broken, desperate. Daniel did not understand, but the sound carved into his heart. It was the voice of someone who had been cast aside, someone who now clung to the one person willing to stand with her. Daniel gave her hand a gentle squeeze, his voice steady. "I'll keep you safe." The meaning may have been lost to her ears, but his tone was clear. She looked at him with wide eyes. The fear still there, but no longer alone. Now there was a glimmer of hope mixed within it. The ruins pressed down with silence again, but the suspense had grown heavy. Each second felt like a drumbeat counting down. Somewhere in the darkness, her pursuers were closing in. Somewhere beyond the crumbled walls, danger was hunting them. Daniel pulled her closer, his mind racing. He had no plan, no backup, only his will to protect her. The broken alien woman had been left for dead, but now she had someone who refused to let her go. The night held its breath. The cruelty of her past was written in every scar, but the choice of her future lay in his hands, and Daniel knew that this was only the beginning. The ruins grew colder as the night stretched on. Daniel sat close to the alien woman, his ears sharp to every sound beyond the broken walls. She still trembled, her body weak. But something in her eyes had changed. The fear was not gone. But it was no longer the only thing inside her. A fragile thread of trust had begun to weave between them. She clutched his jacket around her shoulders, her glowing eyes watching him with quiet caution. Daniel stayed still, letting the silence work. He knew trust could not be forced, it had to be earned. Slowly, he reached into his bag and pulled out another ration bar. He broke it into small pieces and laid them gently on the ground between them. Her eyes flickered down to the food, then back at him. The hesitation was still there, but hunger won over fear. She leaned forward, her trembling fingers brushing against the dirt as she picked up one piece. Daniel did not move. He let her take it, chew slowly and swallow. Her face softened slightly, her breathing steadying. Daniel smiled faintly. He lowered his hand and touched the ground between them, tapping it twice. "Safe," he whispered. His voice was calm, soothing. She tilted her head, her brows furrowing in confusion, but she did not back away. Instead, she mirrored his action, touching the dirt with her fingers in the same rhythm. The simple gesture struck Daniel deeper than he expected. It was the first time she had copied him, not out of fear, but out of choice. A spark of understanding had passed between them, small yet powerful. Encouraged, Daniel took a small stick from the ground and drew a simple symbol in the dirt. "A circle," he pointed to himself. "Daniel," he said firmly. The alien woman blinked at him. Her lips moved, but the sound was too soft, too broken. He leaned closer. "It's all right, try," he whispered. Her voice cracked as she spoke, a short, strange sound that did not resemble his name but carried intent. She pressed her trembling fingers to her chest and repeated the sound. It was her name, though Daniel could not understand it. To him it was more than a word, it was proof she wanted to share something of herself. Daniel nodded, repeating her sound as best as he could. She gasped lightly, her glowing eyes widening. For the first time, he saw her mouth curve not into a smile, but into something close. It was small, fragile, yet filled with meaning. The spark of trust grew warmer, but trust was fragile, and the night outside remained dangerous. A sudden thud echoed in the distance. Daniel froze, the woman stiffened, pulling the jacket tightly around her body. Her glowing eyes darted to the shadows. Her hands trembled as she grabbed his wrist. Her touch was light but desperate. She whispered in her tongue, fast and frightened, though he could not understand. The fear in her voice told him enough. Danger was near. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "Stay quiet," he whispered. He slowly stood, pulling her up with him. She was weak, her legs shaking, but she leaned against him. Her trust, however small, was now her strength. They moved carefully through the ruins. Daniel's flashlight dimmed to a low glow. The woman clung to his arm, her steps uncertain but determined. Each sound outside made her flinch. But she did not let go of him. The bond between them had grown, turning fear into fragile courage. As they reached a collapsed archway, Daniel stopped. He listened. His breath was steady. The voices were clearer now, rough and harsh, spoken in a language he did not know. The woman's grip on his arm tightened, her glowing eyes filled with terror. Daniel guided her behind a broken wall. Crouching low, he placed his finger to his lips. A universal gesture for silence. She hesitated, then nodded faintly. Her breathing was fast, but she obeyed. Minutes dragged like hours. Shadows moved across the rubble as figures passed nearby. Daniel held his breath, ready to shield her if needed. The woman clutched his jacket tighter, her trembling slowing only because his presence anchored her. Finally, the voices faded. The danger had not gone, but it had passed for now. Daniel exhaled slowly. He looked at her, and for the first time she did not look away. Her eyes met his, and in them he saw gratitude. Her hand lifted, shaky but steady enough to rest against his chest. She spoke one soft word in her language. Her voice was still broken, but her tone was gentle. It was not fear, not anger, but something new. Daniel did not know the meaning, but he knew it was a gift. He nodded, pressing his hand lightly over hers. "You're safe," he whispered. She did not understand his words, but she felt the truth in his voice. The ruins around them were still dangerous, the shadows still alive with threats. But in that quiet moment, Daniel realized something important. She no longer saw him only as a stranger. She saw him as her protector. The spark of trust had been lit, and though the night was filled with danger, that small light was enough to guide them forward. The silence of the ruins broke again. This time it was not the soft whisper of the wind or the distant groan of stone. It was sharper, heavier. The sound of boots grinding against rock. Daniel tensed immediately. His hand moved to steady the alien woman. who was trembling against his side. Her glowing eyes widened, filled with fear. She clutched his arm with desperate strength. Her lips moved quickly, whispering in her tongue. Though he could not understand, the tone was enough. She knew who these people were, and she knew they were not here to save her. Daniel's heart pounded. He leaned her against the broken wall and crouched low. Peering through a gap in the rubble, shapes moved in the distance. Dark figures carrying weapons that gleamed faintly in the moonlight. Their voices carried rough and cruel. The alien woman shrank back. Curling into herself, Daniel glanced at her. His choice was clear. If he left now, he might escape, but she would not. The people who had abandoned her were returning to finish what they started, and Daniel could not allow that. He reached for his pack, pulling out his sidearm. The weapon felt small against the weight of the danger, but it was all he had. He checked the magazine, steadying his breath. Then he turned back to her. Her eyes were wide, tears gathering as if she already knew the risk he was about to take. Daniel shook his head gently, placing his finger to his lips. She swallowed hard and nodded. Clutching his jacket tight, her body shook. But for the first time, she did not try to crawl away or hide alone. Instead, she stayed near him, choosing to trust his presence. The figures drew closer, their voices clearer now. Daniel could not understand their language. But the tone carried nothing kind. Laughter mixed with harsh words. The kind of laughter born from cruelty. One voice rose above the rest, sharp and commanding. The alien woman flinched at the sound, covering her ears with shaking hands. Daniel gritted his teeth. Whoever that leader was, he had been the one to mark her body with pain. He had been the one to decide she was nothing but dirt. And now he was coming to erase what little life she still carried. The footsteps grew louder. Shadows stretched across the rubble as the group entered the ruins. Daniel counted at least 4, maybe more. Their weapons were raised loosely, confident, certain no one would challenge them here. Daniel crouched lower, whispering to the woman, "Stay quiet. Stay low." She could not understand the words, but she nodded quickly, her tears catching in the faint glow of her eyes. The first pursuer stepped into view. His skin carried the same faint silver glow as hers. His armor was rough, scarred from battles. His face twisted with arrogance. He looked around the ruins with a cruel grin. Speaking words Daniel could not follow, but the meaning was clear. He was hunting. The alien woman's breath came faster. Daniel placed a steady hand over hers. Pressing gently to calm her, she shivered but held still. Her glowing eyes never left the man outside. 2 more figures followed, scanning the rubble. One of them kicked over a broken piece of wall, laughing at the sound it made. Daniel's grip on his weapon tightened. He knew they would search, and soon they would find her. His heart raced. His training told him to move, to find an escape, but there was no time. The woman could not run. Her body was too weak. If they found her, she was finished unless he stood in their way. Daniel's jaw set firm. He shifted slightly, putting himself between her and the approaching voices. Her hand clung to his sleeve, trembling but unwilling to let go. He looked back at her, meeting her glowing eyes, and gave the smallest nod, a promise, silent but strong. The ruins echoed with footsteps as the pursuers spread out. Their leader barked another command, and one of the figures turned toward the broken wall where Daniel and the woman hid. The sound of boots on stone grew closer. Daniel raised his weapon slowly, his breath steady. His pulse thundered in his ears. The woman buried her face against his arm, whispering in her broken voice, pleading words he could not understand. But her meaning was clear. She was afraid for him, not just for herself. The shadow of the pursuer stretched across the wall. A second later, a face appeared through the gap. The alien man froze, his eyes widening as he saw the human crouch there. The recognition was instant. His mouth opening to shout, Daniel fired. The shot cracked through the ruins. The pursuer fell back with a scream. The others shouted, weapons raising. The silence of the ruins shattered into chaos. The alien woman gasped, clutching Daniel's arm tighter. Her eyes filled with fear and hope tangled together. For the first time, someone had stood between her and the cruelty that hunted her. Daniel pulled her close, his voice sharp but steady. "We fight," he whispered. She could not understand, but she felt the strength in his voice. The ruins trembled with danger, but within the dirt and broken stone, a fragile bond had turned into something stronger. The pursuers had arrived and the battle was about to begin. The ruins exploded with sound, shouts rang out. Heavy boots pounded against stone and weapons lit the night with sharp flashes. Daniel pulled the alien woman behind a crumbled wall. his body shielding hers. Bullets and plasma beams scorched the rubble, sending sparks and dust into the air. The woman clutched his jacket with trembling fingers. Her glowing eyes wide, she whispered in her tongue. Words Daniel could not understand, but the desperation was clear. She was pleading for him to survive, for him not to leave her. Daniel's mind raced. His weapon was small. His cover fragile. He was outnumbered, but he had something his enemies did not. He had purpose. He was not fighting for orders or pride. He was fighting for her, a broken soul left to die. He leaned out and fired. His shot struck one of the pursuers, sending the figure sprawling with a scream. The others cursed in their harsh language, their voices sharp with anger. They returned fire, stones shattering around Daniel. Dust rained down, cutting his cheek, but he did not flinch. The woman gasped, her hands moving to his arm. She tried to pull him back as if to shield him with her weak body. He turned to her, his voice firm but calm. "Stay down," he whispered. She did not understand the words, but she obeyed the tone, lowering herself against the wall. Daniel breathed deeply. His heart thundered. Every sound was sharp, every movement mattered. He waited, counting the rhythm of their footsteps, then he rose and fired again. This time he struck the weapon from one of their hands. The attacker shouted in rage, but Daniel ducked back before return fire hit him. The pursuers spread wider, trying to encircle him. Their leader's voice cut through the chaos, commanding, cruel. The alien woman flinched at the sound, curling tighter against the ground. Daniel clenched his jaw. He could see the terror in her eyes. That voice had haunted her for too long. He stood taller this time, not just to fight but to show her something. His body was a wall between her and her tormentors, a shield not of steel but of will. He shouted back, his voice deep and strong, "You're not taking her." The words meant nothing to them, but the defiance carried weight. Bullets and beams tore the ruins. One grazed his arm, burning flesh. Pain shot through him, but he did not fall. The woman cried out, reaching for him, but he pressed her hand down gently, shaking his head. His eyes told her what his voice could not. He would not stop. The pursuers closed in. One leaped over rubble, blade raised high. Daniel met him head-on, his weapon fired. But the alien kept coming. Forcing Daniel into hand-to-hand combat, they clashed, fists and steel ringing in the night. The alien's strength was fierce, but Daniel's resolve was stronger. With a roar, Daniel struck the attacker down. His chest heaved, sweat and blood mixing on his face. He turned back instantly, making sure the woman was safe. She stared at him. Her glowing eyes filled not only with fear but with awe. She had never seen anyone fight for her. Not like this. Two more attackers pressed forward. Daniel dove for cover, returning fire. His shots were precise, fueled by rage and heart. One fell, the other staggered, their leader shouted again, voice sharp with fury. The battle was shifting. The human they thought weak was standing like a wall. The alien woman crawled closer. Though her body trembled, she reached for him, her hand brushing his back. Her voice cracked as she spoke. A broken word, it sounded like a plea, but also like strength. Daniel heard her, and his heart tightened. She was no longer just surviving. She was fighting with him in spirit. The leader finally stepped into view, taller, armored, his weapon glowing with cruel energy. He looked at Daniel with contempt, his voice boomed. And even without understanding, Daniel knew what he was saying. He was calling the woman worthless. "Dirt, nothing." Daniel stood firm, his voice thundered back. "She is not nothing." The woman gasped, her glowing eyes filling with tears. She did not understand his language, but she felt the power in his tone. The leader charged, weapon raised. Daniel braced, his gun empty, his strength drained. But his will unbroken, he met the strike head-on. The clash shook the ruins. Sparks flew as steel met steel. Pain tore through Daniel as the weapon cut his side, but he held firm. The woman screamed, her weak voice shattering the silence. For the first time, she reached out, not in fear, but in defiance. She grabbed a broken stone and hurled it at the leader. It struck his head, breaking his focus for a split second. Daniel seized the moment. He drove his fist forward, striking with everything he had. The leader stumbled, roaring with rage. His weapon slipped from his grasp. Daniel pressed forward, every ounce of human grit burning through him. With one final push, he sent the leader crashing to the ground. Silence fell again. The ruins echoed with fading cries. Daniel staggered, his chest heaving. His blood stained the dirt. But he was still standing. The woman crawled to him, her hands shaking as she touched his wound. Her glowing eyes overflowed with tears, not of fear but of something new, she whispered in her broken voice. A word soft but full of meaning. It was her name, given again, this time not as a question but as a gift. Daniel smiled weakly, his voice rough. Safe, he whispered, and for the first time she believed it. The ruins lay quiet again. Smoke drifted through the broken walls, and the night air was heavy with the scent of dust and blood. Daniel leaned against the rubble, his body shaking. His side burned where the leader's weapon had cut deep, but his eyes stayed open, fixed on the alien woman beside him. She knelt in the dirt, her glowing eyes full of tears. Her hands pressed against his wound, trembling but determined. She whispered words in her own tongue, soft and broken. They were prayers, or maybe just desperate pleas, though he could not understand. He felt the meaning in her voice. Daniel gave a weak smile. I'm all right, he whispered. His voice rough. She did not know the words, but she saw the way his lips moved and the calm in his eyes. She shook her head, refusing to believe he was all right. But still she pressed harder, refusing to let him go. The night felt endless. But something had changed. The cruel voices that once haunted the ruins were gone. The ones who had cast her aside now lay defeated. And for the first time, the woman did not feel like prey. She was not dirt anymore because someone had stood for her. Someone had cared. Daniel's vision blurred, but he stayed conscious. He could feel her hand resting over his chest, steady and gentle for so long. She had known only hands that struck, that chained, that hurt. Now her touch carried care, fragile but real. The woman pulled the jacket tighter around his body. Her glowing eyes softened as she studied him. She tried to form words, her voice cracking like broken glass after a long moment. A sound escaped her lips. It was his name. Not perfect, not clear, but close enough. Daniel's breath caught. He looked at her with wide eyes. She had given him her name before, but now she tried to speak his. It was her way of telling him he mattered, that he was not just a stranger in the ruins. He was the one who had changed everything. He chuckled weakly, wincing at the pain. That's me, he whispered. She tilted her head, not fully understanding, but her lips curved into the faintest smile, fragile yet filled with light. Time passed slowly. The stars wheeled overhead. The woman stayed by his side, refusing to move. Every sound outside made her tense, but she no longer thought of running. Instead, she thought of protecting him, as he had protected her when dawn touched the horizon. The ruins glowed faintly under golden light. Daniel stirred, his strength returning little by little. The woman looked at him, her glowing eyes reflecting the sunrise. Something in her posture was different. She no longer crouched like someone expecting a blow. She sat tall, shoulders trembling but lifted with fragile pride. Daniel tried to stand, his legs shook, but he forced himself up. The woman gasped, rushing to steady him. Her hands were small and weak, but her will was strong. Together they rose, leaning on each other. He looked at her, his voice low. We can't stay here. She did not understand, but she felt the urgency in his tone. She nodded, helping him step forward. Every movement was slow, painful, but filled with meaning as they walked through the ruins. Daniel noticed how she no longer kept her eyes fixed only on the ground. She glanced at him often, as if making sure he was still there. Her glowing eyes carried not just fear now, but hope. When they reached the edge of the broken settlement, Daniel paused. He looked back at the place where he had found her, half buried in dirt, broken and abandoned. That memory burned in his chest. He turned to her, meeting her eyes. No more dirt, he whispered. She tilted her head, confusion crossing her face, but then slowly, she seemed to understand. Her lips trembled, and she whispered something in her tongue. Her voice stronger now, the meaning was clear. She was no longer nothing, because he had seen her as someone. The road ahead was uncertain. Daniel was wounded, she was still fragile, and danger was never far, but they had something stronger than fear. They had trust born in the ruins, carved from pain, and sealed in the moment he chose to stand for her. As they moved together, the woman stopped suddenly. Her hand touched his arm. He turned to her, and she looked up with glowing eyes shining in the dawn. She pressed her forehead lightly against his shoulder, a gesture of her people, a gesture of bond. Daniel froze, then smiled faintly. His hand rested on her back, steady and gentle in that fragile embrace. The past was left behind. The dirt, the cruelty, the abandonment, all of it faded, replaced by something new, hope. The ruins were no longer just a place of pain. They had become the place where a broken alien woman learned what it meant to be cared for. and where a human with nothing but courage and kindness had turned despair into a spark of life. They walked on, side by side, the rising sun painting their path in light. Neither knew what waited beyond the horizon, but they knew one truth: they were no longer alone.